I hope you are ready for today's episode because it is an amazing conversation with my friend Brian Doyle. Brian and I met about 5 years ago at an event, and he reconnected with me over the pandemic, and I am so grateful that he joined me for this episode today. So who is Brian? Well, Brian is responsible for the vision, strategy, and production of all fundraising special events for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community center in New York City. Before working at the LGBTQ Center, he also executed wide-ranging benefits, receptions, and special events for the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York as well. And then before he was at the Met, Brian had a long-standing relationship and role within the TED community. So you've heard me talk about TED Talks before. Brian was a TEDx community coordinator, and he also spent years prior to that individually organizing TEDx conferences across multiple locations. So Brian talks about it. He has been in the TED community since he was a teenager, and you'll get to hear all about the impact of being behind the scenes at what so many of us have been impacted by seeing videos and potentially in-person TED Talks. Brian also talks to me about his incredible work with this project that he's doing all around gratitude called the Grateful Project, grateful with 2 L's. And I am just so excited for any of you who have any experience doing gratitude work. It can be challenging, it can be really fulfilling, and I think that it's really exciting for us to hear Brian's take on it because it brings a whole new level of nuance, excitement, and depth to the conversation around gratitude. And I feel so fortunate that I was invited not once, but twice to participate in his project. So I can't wait for you to hear about that. And then finally, one of the aspects that Brian and I talk about throughout this episode is the role of race. And so Brian is a cisgender white man, and we talk a lot about whiteness and his role as a cisgender man. So how does that play out? Oftentimes on this particular podcast, we don't talk as much about whiteness from the perspective of somebody that's navigating their own whiteness. And I know personally, as most of you know, I'm biracial, and so I have a white identity as well. And so navigating your own relationship to whiteness, no matter what your skin color is, no matter what your race is a very complicated thing in our culture that tells us we shouldn't be talking about or even labeling anything as white. But having the opportunity to really have an open, honest communication conversation around whiteness is one of the things that I think will unlock so much for so many of us. So for those of you who are eager and willing to have more conversations around race, especially for those of you that are white, I really encourage you to listen to the tidbits of wonderful magic that we drop in here, the experiences that Brian has shared. And I really encourage you to let me know how those things land for you, both with regard to our conversation about race and whiteness, but I also, because I love this stuff and I want to hear from you, want to hear how the conversation around gratitude lands for you too. Because I have a feeling it might land a little differently than you expect heading in. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this conversation with my friend Brian. Hi, Brian. Welcome to Checkbox Other. I'm so excited that you're here joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness. Just so you all know, I had to take a minute before we started because I was so excited. My smile was so big. I was heavy breathing. I'm just so happy for Brian to be here. So here's the deal. To start off, I would love, I always call it a Cliff Notes version of your journey, the twists, turns, aha moments, anything that you feel is yeah, I want the people to know about, what has led you to where you are today.
Totally. Well, again, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. That's a great question from just a starting point. I would say that some top level things to know around my journey are that I currently reside in New York City, a place that I never really thought I would live in growing up. I'm from California originally, which I like to say that California kind of gave me a bit more of the slower pace and willingness to chat with people. I mean, that's a massive generalization about a place, but I'm grateful to have come from there to this side of the country and the city specifically to kind of, start and at this point continue my conversations in my career here. A huge part of my journey has been working not only as a volunteer or as a speaker or as an intern or working full time at their offices, but with TED, like TED Talks. It played a huge role in my life from literally 17 and towards the end of high school, throughout pretty much my first year here in New York as a professional. And I say that because the network and community, and as we like to say, the tribe that it provided me with was and still is a huge part of my being, in terms of just being around other folks that are like-minded, and have big ideas to share, and to also just to amplify those big ideas as producers of events, which is what leads me to probably the biggest thing, is that I'm an event producer, and more than that, I like to sort of describe myself as an experience producer. I don't particularly draw myself towards big events or small events. I don't have any specifics usually around, I'm not very specific around, what it can or cannot have as an event, but I'd like to think that most of my events, not all, have some form of an impact on those that are attending. And to me, it's both the process of the events as well as the conclusion of them that really gets me going. So I'm sure I'll talk more about all of those things in a minute, but I think the biggest things that lead me are really empathy, and trying to really kickstart and foster human connection.
Well, heck yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
if anybody's listening and wondering why Brian's here, I mean, hi, hello, we should hang out all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're going to get into even more of it. I mean, because I'm going to get in front of myself. So let me go to the first question we usually ask after kind of bio. Tell us who you are. Tell us what you want us to know. Hence the name of the podcast is Checkbox Other. Share a time, or more than one, we never really limit you, in your life where you have felt other or different, or as though you don't belong. I feel like there's so many pieces to what you talk about, the power of creating these experiences, that so much of that brings us to like the universal human experience. But I'd love to hear about kind of those other experiences.
Totally. There are two that come to mind, and both I would say have relatively possibly equal impact on me. The first being, and this stems from just even being a small kid to, preteen, teenage, all that gets, even to this day, to be very frank, is I've always felt other around the way that I think and see relationships with people. And I would be more specific to say the vulnerability around that. I just I've always had crazy ideas. I've always shared ideas. I've been stung a lot for that. I've been teased a lot for being so open, or for sharing so much, or for almost sharing too much. I know a lot of folks, rightfully so, who keep things close to the chest until they have been completed, whether that be for their own security or their own street cred, and just saying or doing what they say and saying what they do. But even with family, with close friends, I always felt other in the way that my brain thought about ideas and around what I wanted to do with my life. I was never some crazy left field prodigy who from age 3 knew what I was going to do. But I just, I shared things or ideas around stuff, and would often get, I would never say ridiculed, but sort of teased and prodded at being strange for that. And yet, for some weird reason, I kind of knew deep down, or at least hoped and believed deep down, that it did make me who I was, and to really appreciate that, as opposed to, running away from that at age 7 and never coming back to that. I mean, I know there's a bunch of sayings around, as a kid, the imagination is everything, and you kind of spend the rest of your life losing that. And I do agree in that sense of like, how do you maintain that anything is possible from being a kid? And I also will make known that I think that stems a lot from privilege, and a lot from being, growing up in a certain way, a certain class, certain anything. But then the second one that kind of ties into that is, my whole journey with realizing that I was gay, because, even in 2021, being LGBT is not accepted everywhere, and it's also its own hierarchy. I'm a white cisgender gay man who absolutely is at the top of the food chain of the LGBT community, and so I have my own privilege within that community. But the other that I felt, of course, growing up, was just your classic sense of, I don't relate to the boys around me and what they're talking about, who they are attracted to, what they want to do. and really kind of working through that journey of realizing that. And at this point, I'm 28 years old, and I've been openly gay to myself, most importantly, and to others since for almost actually 12 years now, which is again an immense. It's a joy. It's a privilege. I'm very lucky to say that and to be so confident in that. But it's played a huge role in my life because I think I have, at least a fraction, probably more, but definitely a fraction more of empathy towards, that checkbox other, that people who don't feel like they fit. I've definitely felt myself as a misfit, if not mainly or entirely, but constantly in my life, while also trying to acknowledge that, there is a certain level of privilege that I have, without being a misfit, because I think that it's different for everybody. But those, I think, are the two that come to mind, and they've been very strong. I think what started as things that felt like weaknesses and what felt like stuff that I had to almost work on erasing became and are still and will always at this point be something that makes me so proud and strong, which I feel like is maybe everyone's own personal journey of like turning those others into strengths as opposed to hiding them if you can and if it's safe.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting. There's such a beauty in how you're talking about I guess you were using the word imagination of childhood and kind of the ability to see the world through a lens of awe, and how that disintegrates in the way that we have to kind of polish ourselves and make ourselves appropriate societally. And it is just so interesting because so often when I talk to people, especially people that are lovers of stories, are actively putting ideas out there, wanting to have conversations about things that like might seem like, again, out of left field, bizarre, out of the box. So much of that experience is either rooted in the self story of being too much, or the external reaction that what you're showing up with is too much for people to handle. It's not welcome here. And so I don't know, one of the things I was actually saying this to one of the previous guests a couple of weeks ago. She messaged me because somebody had listened to the episode and texted her. And I said, I think those of us that have had to kind of like live in the in-between have had to be like told we're one thing when we really deep down know and believe that like we occupy a space that needs to be occupied, even though people have told us we need to, package it differently or just put it away. We are kind of we're charting the future. There is this, if nothing else, in the last 18 months, we have seen how so many things that we have just taken as the way we operate do not function and have not functioned for a very long time. And so I think the idea of embracing that sense of awe and that willingness to hold space for what might not be concretely told as the way we do things is such a wonderful gift. And the ability, too, I think when you're talking about the acknowledgement, I think one of the things a lot of times when I'm talking to folks, especially in the corporate sphere, but when we talk about privilege and power, in the mix of the fact that we all understand what it feels like to not belong at some level, that those things don't need to necessarily be mutually exclusive, that the beauty is the ability to blend both being in a position of privilege and power and being in a position where you do not have that power, where you're not accepted as who you are, and being able to meld those two things together to exist. That creates a space for those people that may have the privilege and power to still be connected to your humanity, and those that do not to be connected to your humanity if you have more social power than they might base on their identity. So it's like, I don't know, there's a part of me, I was referencing it in a different conversation about it being like kind of this army of like Marvel characters of like, for all of us who have been told we're too much, like our origin stories are all different, but that ability to kind of be able to be that blended bridge helps us chart a future that, would I view it as helps us leapfrog much further into the future than we would if we just kept kind of chipping away slowly. So
I'm just so grateful, because I think so much of what you just shared, whether people have lived the exact experiences or not, it opens a door for us to say, oh yeah, we can actually have an interplay across the board of the various identities we have and hold, and take up our unique space in that. And we don't need to be somebody else in order to have the microphone and have our story matter.
Oh, for sure. I totally agree with that. And thank you for saying that. I do firmly believe that, whatever, speaking for myself, the power and the social capital, whatever you want to call all of these things that I hold, is an opportunity for me to, like you said, bridge that to others, even while at the same time I might also feel other in certain spaces. Like I to your point, you can, both can happen. I can feel that other, and I can ask for help, but I can also use what I do have, the skills that I do have, and the the privileges that I carry with me to help get that access to others. And the goal is not for, in this case, right, for white men to be maybe powerless, but to use their power for good. And I want to credit that. I'll have to send you exactly where I heard that, but it was a podcast episode based on race that I was listening to the other day, and it was very specific to that. Around this woman had said that, in this specific example, that folks of color are not asking white folks to lose their power, but rather to use it, maybe to give others power, to use it to build others up. And I just think that that's so important for me and for other white people to realize in this specific context, right, of race, and sex, that it's not about a finite amount of power to go around. Same thing with the journey of equality, which I'm very passionate about, which I think, of course, has an interesting connection to race, in the sense of there's not a finite amount of marriage equality, of any equality. Like, we're not asking for, LGBT people aren't asking, right, for folks who are not LGBT to lose their rights. We are asking for, at the bare minimum, the same.
Right.
Which, for most folks that I think I surround myself, that's understood. But but as we can see in the news and the way that
Yeah.
this country and the world has unfolded, especially in the last handful of years, it's not as obvious as maybe we thought.
Yeah. And it's so, I'm grateful that you're bringing that to the forefront, because I think that is kind of the crux of I always think about it like the heat in people's stomachs that they get when maybe they don't have experience talking about an aspect of our society that doesn't necessarily create an equal, equitable situation. We grow up in a
Mm.
country that talks a lot about freedom, and we talk about, equal opportunity and justice for all. And we pledge that with our hands over our hearts at a flag. And so through repetition had this belief that by saying that, it was true. And then as we're being faced, I would say year over year, but day by day, 15 minutes by 15 minutes, with different versions of us playing this reel in our head of, okay, where it's kind of, we've been taught to kind of jockey for position. I always think of how we were taught that America was a superpower always. And like this idea of being the best is very American. It's very kind of that individualized way of thinking about things. And the ability to kind of move away from this win-loss binary of you're good, you're bad, you're the winner, you're the loser, whatever things you want to put on either side of a spectrum, that there's nothing on the in-between. That by being different from someone else, it doesn't diminish their ability to exist as a person. And so often, because of the way we've been conditioned, and again, as human beings, as like the kind of animalistic background of who we are as humans, we are created to notice difference and similarity. That is kind of how animals operate with one another, on a very kind of, we talked about Ted being your tribe, on a very like collective, creative, like levels of like historic ways. But at this point, we have this society where nuance needs to exist, critical thought needs to exist. And also what we're witnessing in the last I'll say 5 years, it's more than that, is this overstimulation and exhaustion that has us going to kind of this very base level of, I'm only willing to have room for a headline. I'm only willing to have room for one way of processing this. And I don't want to go deeper because it makes me question things. And I don't have the capacity, wherewithal, or even experience saying things. And I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to be canceled, whatever the things are that keep everyone in their quote corners, that really neither of those corners, if there are two, encompass what each person who's in them needs. But really creating the space for us to be like, yeah, I'm going to constantly be ever evolving and changing, because there isn't a right or a wrong. There isn't one or the other. There's a unique, and I always talk about this in one of the, in the membership we have, the logo is a fingerprint for a reason. That like there's a fingerprint for every person. And yes, we all have similarities in certain ways that we operate. We have identity buckets with which we can fall into, but that doesn't mean that we are carbon copies of each other, and we shouldn't feel like we have to be. And in an efficiency of a society perspective, yeah, there are ways that we operate as a collective, but also, have we gone too far? Have we gone too far to kind of making ourselves robots in order for efficiency and profitability to reign supreme?
Oh, totally. And I actually really appreciate what you said about things, just even around cancel culture and around leaving room for, for growth, I guess I would say, because I'm a huge question asker, and I'm a huge proponent of the fact that I am going to mess up, and I'm going to, and that I need to learn, and that I want to learn. And I think that there are so often moments where, to your point, that people are stay quiet for potentially reasons of apathy, which I think is very dangerous. Of of this doesn't involve me, so I'm just going to stay quiet, even though there is injustice going on. It's like, well, it doesn't affect me. I don't need to speak up. I think that's a huge issue. But more importantly, I think, or maybe not more importantly, but similarly, I think there's that idea of, oh gosh, I have this question, but I'm not going to ask it because I'm afraid of getting burned, or of maybe looking stupid, or even in my case, right? Something that I think I'm guilty of a lot is there's a lot of resources out there that don't involve having to ask a question and make a fool of yourself. You can read about things. You can type your question into Google, and I'm very guilty of that sometimes, where I could just read about this myself and really try to educate myself first, as opposed to speaking on it.
Yeah.
Especially, right, if I'm speaking out of turn, and only reading a headline or not reading anything at all. And so I do think that that's something that I, even in my own life, I'm trying to get better at. And I fortunately have a partner and friends who call me out on that, which I think is important. And so it is a push and a pull. And I think that from the other side of it, and I talk about this a lot with my friends, of speaking specifically right to the LGBT community, something that I'm a part of, is it isn't necessarily every LGBT person's responsibility, and this is my opinion, to have to receive questions or comments that are maybe okay in intent, but that they hurt, because again, intent, maybe if not often, if not always, doesn't really matter, in many situations, right? The intent could be great, but a friend of mine recently said, if you swing a baseball bat and you accidentally hit somebody behind you, your intent doesn't matter. You still hit that person with a bat.
You still broke their nose. Yep.
Right. Exactly.
Yep.
You're going to apologize, and you're going to immediately try to rectify the situation. So when it comes to words, why are we not doing the same? And so in this case, I think about myself of, if somebody asks me a really offensive question, to be around being a member of the LGBT community, I personally have a pretty thick skin, where I would most likely be comfortable receiving that, not taking it personally, and then also trying to help in any way I can educate. But I'm also very clear that that's not everyone's responsibility, right? Like, if that makes you uncomfortable, you have every right to tell that person to, to buzz off, let's say, and to, and
you can
that's
swear
fine.
here. You can swear here if you want.
Great.
We swear here.
Perfect. then I will start. Yeah, no, I mean, I just think that's important where it's like, it's such, again, a push and a pull where I think the only way that we progress as a society is through asking questions, and more specifically through asking hard questions, and actually learning from the answers, which I, again, I am part of that process. But I also personally like to make space for folks that are just like, I've had enough, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to answer that question, and I'm not going to even field it, because that also makes sense to me too.
Yeah, there's two things that are popping in my brain. So let's hope I can stay on task and bring them to us. The first one that came to my mind was so interesting because even in being somebody that, I mean, you are in and holding and producing experiences where there's conversation very much being had about the LGBTQ community. And so proximity and participation provide you with the opportunity to witness how that conversation goes. And a lot of times there are people who don't have that benefit of conversation that are being asked because of their identity and not necessarily because of their willingness. And also, I would beg to say that just because you have that experience and that thick skin and the comfort, that doesn't mean that every time, all the time, that that is the case. I will say, the thing that keeps popping into my mind was, we'll say June. We'll say June 2020. I mean, there's a couple conversations going on about this then, yeah. And unfortunately have dissipated. But in my own personal experience, I had been doing very, very targeted work in my relationship with my race, my racial identity, my racial makeup, my ethnic makeup as well, for about 3 years, very, very, very purposely. In education, in coaching, in therapy, very intentionally, like switch therapists so I could be working very closely on racial identity. Learned all the things, trained in how to hold these conversations in corporate spaces that are pretty homogenous, especially from a racial perspective and also a gender perspective. And still it was too much at times. And still, though I am a resource on paper, I am a resource that you can send into my inbox and get a response appropriately. The inundation with which messages, information, conversations about race were just everywhere, because for a lot of people, I was their Black friend. And so, yeah, I can have those conversations, but also kind of that consent of, okay, is this okay to be bringing up right now? I know you talk about this, especially if you aren't in an official capacity as like my client that hires me to talk about these things. You're just someone in my life. As much as you might have that thick skin, when you are in a position of a targeted identity in a society that doesn't make space, there is an additional amount of, again, we talk about emotional labor that goes into having to do this work each and every day. And so whether it be something that you're feeling up to doing for work, up to doing for life, there is a spectrum with which, though you're feeling, and I'm not speaking for you, I'll say this, though there are many days where I'm like, yeah, let's talk about this. Thank God I've been having to live this colorblind conversation my whole life, and that doesn't work. But there are days where I'm like, today's not the day. And it doesn't mean the day will never come. And it also doesn't mean you're wrong for asking. But my ability to set a boundary with where my energy is able to hold that space is so important. And I think, again, it leads us to a conversation around nuance and the importance of bringing the other human into the experience, rather than your experience of learning being just through the two-dimensional screen of Google, that you can learn that way. But the way that we have learned for generations on generations is the ability for us to connect with other people. And so look at this pivot into the second. This is amazing. And then I'll stop because I want to hear from you on it. But my thought about this was, it's so interesting because we have all of this conversation around identity and hopefully more progress, right? Like there is definitely conversations that are being had that haven't been had and we didn't think were going to happen for a long time. But the power of having those conversations in community with other people. And so much of that in my brain is through all of what you started talking about, where your passion and your purpose lead, right? To creating spaces of having conversations about ideas, the unspoken, and to be creating spaces where people can come together through connection. And so I'd love to hear kind of your thought about how one, storytelling can play into this kind of bridging of the gap, and two, the ability for us to hopefully soon, speaking into existence, be able to be in community with one another outside of the two-dimensional screens that we're operating with right now.
Wow.
A
Yes.
lot.
No, first I want to say thank you for that really, I think, important point around, as you described, I'm paraphrasing, but not today, like not every moment, right? Like taking that space. Like I can relate to that as an LGBT person. I cannot relate to that of being a Black person in America and getting asked probably every 5 minutes, as you described, especially if you're that quote unquote, only Black friend, about what to do. And honestly, I'll share, and I think this is important. I mean, even last year, which kind of ties into which I'll get to about storytelling. To put a very long story short, I was facilitating a group conversation with some friends, and I ended up, quite literally asking one of our dearest friends who is Black, with not these exact words, but I basically said, "What should we do? Like, what should white people do?" And I think the most important part is that I didn't realize it. My partner had to sort of tell me about it later, and like, "Hey, you probably didn't think you did this, but this is basically how it came across." And of course, that stung for me because I don't want to do that, and that wasn't my intent. Which I think again is very key to point out, that like intent didn't fucking matter. Like I still said it,
Yeah.
and the impact was felt. And I just think it was so interesting because again, here I am, right, thinking I'm progressive, thinking I'm, trying my best, which is not necessarily untrue, but in some ways that's almost the most dangerous, because I'm unaware of it. To, I guess, flip it another way, right? Everything I'm doing must be positive because I'm quote unquote a good one, but that's not true, and that's not or not always true. And so it just was such an interesting learning experience for me of like, gosh, I was thinking I was doing the right thing, and not asking this person, what should we do? But I actually did. I mean, indirectly.
Yeah.
Right. And so even just within my work, my actual day job, we have some race equity work that we've been doing. I will say, unfortunately, in reaction to 2020, one can wish that it came before that, but for a lot of folks and a lot of organizations, it did take May/June of 2020. But anyways, one of the things that I think has been most helpful is that I am part of a white caucus. And so I get to talk to other white people about what we need to do and what, what should be done. And it does not involve us asking Black and BIPOC folks, "Hey, what do we do?" And just the importance of that space and that learning without, having to just drop that on folks who are experiencing that, like you said, maybe not daily, but maybe every 15 minutes. So that's just one thing I wanted to mention, because I just think I think the only way that white people can get better at this is to actually work at it, and then to also admit when we're wrong and to stop being so defensive, both of which, if not all of which, are things that I'm constantly working on myself. And it's a process. And so that's one thing. But then when it comes to storytelling, which to the other points you brought up, one of the things that I actually started last year in the midst of the pandemic was what my partner and I called cocktails and conversations. And once a month, well, it started once a week, which of course, as we all hit Zoom burnout, then switched to it then switched to bi-weekly, and then of course to monthly, and it has since I think the summer of this year we sort of stopped it. But for a solid, I think we got through something like 40 or 50 conversations, something obscene. It was an hour on a Zoom where we just talked about something that was not the pandemic. So we talked about cooking, we talked about nostalgia, we talked about forgiveness, and we talked about childhood memories, we talked about hobbies, anything and everything. And for me, it was funny because when we had the hobbies discussion, everyone kind of went around sharing what their hobbies were, what they picked up throughout the pandemic, and people had started playing the guitar or they learned how to knit, whatever. The question was posed to me, and I was like, gosh, I think my hobby is this. Like, my hobby was quite literally the organizing of everybody to get together on a Zoom. Because I'm just, maybe obsession is a strong word, but I'm very passionate about that bringing people together, because I think what you're alluding to, and I'll finish what I was going to say. I think what you're alluding to, there's just something about, right, the art and the even like the physiology around just connecting to people through storytelling and through actually speaking. And that my asterisk there is that I have zero background, right, in science or the actual what's going on in the brain or the heart or whatever's actually happening in the body. And I don't try to take that role. For me, it's just, how can you not feel this magic, right? Like, you go to a concert, everyone who goes to a concert is going to understand why you go to a concert. You're not going to say, oh, why wouldn't you just watch this on YouTube later, right? Like, they're going to immediately be like, are you kidding me? You're being in the room, you hear it live.
Yeah.
It's the same thing for me. It's the same thing around storytelling. It's the same thing around having coffee. It's the same thing around why this pandemic has been so hard on, I think, both extroverts and introverts, because if you really know the definition of those things, it's not somebody's shy or awkward. It's really where they gather their energy from. And for both introverts and extroverts and everyone between, in-person conversation can be crucial and really, I guess, just incredible and magical. And so for me, that was a tough thing over this past year, but that's kind of why I started implementing these Zoom things, and then some other projects, which I think we can talk about. But yeah, so storytelling for me, and this dovetails into like my work with TED, right? Of just, there's something about, being in a room and hearing somebody share something, but I would also argue that vulnerability plays a huge role. Somebody opens up, I'm assuming that the science around it, very a la Brene Brown, it allows you to think the same and to feel more of a connection and to then maybe want to open up yourself. And that to me is like, how could that not be the best part of being a human? Like, why would you spend your entire life not doing that? And of course, within reason, keeping boundaries, like all that good stuff. Absolutely. But like in the right spaces.
Yeah. And I am not a scientist. However, I have been nerding out hard on this stuff, because I'm like, so my background is in business and marketing. And really the reason I went into marketing was because I wanted to go into psychology and I wanted to be financially independent. And when I was 17, 16 years old, I was told by going into like English and psychology that wouldn't financially support me, which is ridiculous to think of now, because like, I believe that the psychology industry is literally what we need so hard right now and coming out of this. Again, totally. Millennials are the therapy generation. All of you that have heard me say this in past episodes, proud to be the therapy generation. So I have one thing that I want to make sure that I add to the conversation about kind of whiteness. And then I'll come back, because I think one of the things that I don't even know, there's so much about this that we have like on paper or in like listicles. And one of the things I always tell people, I'm like, if you're a white person trying to work on this stuff, consistently just refer to whiteness as a thing. Just normalize saying white people, white person, white thing, in the same way that it's completely and utterly normal to be hearing every other race mentioned in conversation. So if it's hard for you to do everything and anything else, you feel uncomfortable, just start using the word white. Having that come out of your mouth, having that be part of the experience, because it is something that has, through silence, been normalized and prioritized. And at least for me, I feel like that is like, if you're uncomfortable, if you're uncomfortable to do, I have friends that are like, I would never march. I don't feel okay. Can you say the word white every once in a while? Like, that's all I'm asking. Gives you just like a little thing that you can just start normalizing, because in conversation with other people, especially if it's mostly white people in a room, it starts to become something that's like, oh yeah, that is a factor of what's happening here. It doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just is. And so by at least acknowledging that it exists, it gives you room and space for us to realize that the way that we've been talking about things is only shining the light on other and not shining the light on what has been created around. So I just like to mention that, especially if anybody's sitting here going, okay, but I hear all the things Brian's saying and I still not sure what to do. I always encourage, like, you don't have to be an Instagram activist. You don't have to be a marching activist if you don't want to. I encourage you to find your way to get involved. But there are a lot of ways to just normalize the experience of what so many other folks have known to be true every day. So I think, as you're saying, just like bringing stuff into the front of our minds and allowing them to sit there is important. So I want to bring that up. And the other piece, one of the other things, I always talk about my most important white person in my life that I feel like is I have to educate her, is my mother. So sorry, Mom, at this point, she's like, I know you say this every time. But I always try to bring up in like the most kind of mundane ways. I'm like, have you noticed? So like a perfect example that I was talking about the other day is the show Community. I don't know if you know the show Community at all. It's on Netflix. So I just started watching it. I had never watched it before. And it was in like 2009 or something. It's like a lot longer ago than I expected. And I said to her, I was like, can you just watch the opening of Community and tell me if you notice anything? And my mother loves to be like, she loves crime shows because she likes to figure them out, right? So like, I know that that's a wonderful way to be. I'm not going to be like, you're not going to get an A+ or an F on this. I just want to get your perspective. And she's like, I watched it a couple of times and here's what I realized. And I really encourage those of you that are listening to go onto Netflix if you have a Netflix account, assuming that's an assumption of privilege for sure and access. Or you can go to YouTube and see if you can watch it's like 15 seconds, but just seeing how the opening segment, and knowing, I would encourage you to know who the actors are and their racial makeup, but how that kind of comes about. And so very like small ways of just noticing how we are just being little seeds are being planted around that we aren't necessarily overtly happening and aren't, for sure, like you're saying, not necessarily intentional, but from marinating in so much of colorblindness and a culture that is very much prioritizing whiteness, how things tend to play out. And I think it gives you back the autonomy to see the world from a lens of like, is this what I believe in a value, or is this just what I've seen? So I said I was going to do that quick and I couldn't because I wanted to share. I was like, but I do want to, what I want to bring back, what I think is so incredibly interesting and also feeds into your Grateful Project is, I believe, the ability for that storytelling that you're talking about with TED, that you're talking about with your cocktails and conversations, which, oh my God, yeah. Yes, please. And I feel like you got to bring that into like real life afterwards. Is the ability to really see another person living the experience that you've seen either in an article, or you have like the heartbeat that that you have proximate to you, that you have within arm's length / Zoom arm's length, to be like, that's a very real experience that somebody outside of me has had. And so I will say, one of the coolest experiences I had during this was you reaching out to me after us not talking to each other or seeing each other in like years, and you'd be like, hi, any chance you could chat? And I will tell you, the amount of work I've been doing around boundaries and like all that stuff, something about you reaching out, I was like, I think today, yeah, I think that's a yeah. And I will tell you, anybody around me is like, you don't respond to, I'm sorry, but there's just something like, again, the universe all came together on the same day. And our conversation that followed up from it through your Grateful Project was amazing. So I would love to hear how you have created 8 years ago, the Grateful Project, or the inspiration from 8 years ago, and how kind of these experiences of gratitude and these stories of your own, but then also what you have done in the last 100 days of like bringing other people, like I keep thinking of like paying it forward through the power of storytelling and gratitude. So can you talk a little bit about what the Grateful Project is and kind of what you've learned, what gratitude is all about? Because obviously it is a word that is out there that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Definitely. I definitely can. And I also, I feel like we both keep doing this, but I
That's
wanted to
okay.
say 10 seconds worth of your note about like whiteness and the word and around saying it. It it is a, as a white person, it, what you just described should be one of many reasons, or not reason, it should be one of many identifying moments that prove the supremacy of whiteness.
Mm,
because like if we're not using, if it's just quote common or normal or just the default, like as a, like to white people including myself, right, we should like think almost reflectively about that and think, wait, why is that? And then it's like boom, right there in front of your face, the one of, again, many identifying moments of the proof of this white supremacy, of that is just the supreme,
yeah.
and it's inarguable. But anyways, I, that is something that I realized while you were talking, and it's also just something that I think me and other white people I think grapple with, is just to your
Yeah.
point, all the little seedlings of oh gosh, this is everywhere. But to the Grateful Project, I yes, so I guess for full context, when in 2012, specifically on New Year's Day of 2012, I was a bit younger, and I was in a car. I was in a car with a bunch of my, or a bunch. I was in a car with two of my best friends, and to put a long story short, we sort of narrowly escaped a car accident that would have easily killed us all. And it basically spurred a 11-month brain process of thinking about my relationships in my life, and more specifically around, was I being honest to myself and others about the impact of them, about the impact of who they are, both individually but also on my life specifically. And then had I been direct about that, right? Like all these thoughts are, oh God, you know, I love my mom, I love these people. Had I actually voiced that? And
Right.
so then, funny enough, about around Thanksgiving time in 2012, I was here in New York City, and I was sleeping on my aunt's couch for a couple days, and um, it took social media, something that I do use a lot, something that I think has a lot of power to it. It took social media to actually anger me, because it was Thanksgiving and I saw a lot of people saying, oh, I'm so thankful for my friends and family, blah, 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 blah. And my thought was, you know, user, are you actually saying these things to your family? It's like when you see somebody say happy birthday to their mom on social media. That's lovely. Have you called her? You know,
Yeah.
did you tell her the same thing?
Yeah.
You know, if she's still alive, you know, like there's a lot of reasoning there, but that sort of anger I felt is what then finally, after 11 months, kind of sparked this aha moment where I
Mhm.
decided, completely out of the blue, like I didn't really know why I thought of this structure, it just kind of dawned on me, but I decided to call one person every day, or I would sit down with them in person if I could, um, and tell them thank you for their role in my life. And at the end of each day, I would write a blog post about that person, which was not verbatim, but it was sort of like similar thoughts that I had expressed over the phone or in person, so that each person kind of had this private moment together, just the two of us, and then also a written form in some way that theoretically you could look back on if you so choose to. That was almost 10 years ago. I did a different person every day, and that project was called 365 Days of Thank You, and it changed almost everything in my life, but most importantly, it changed my relationships in the most positive and beautiful way, as well as it rewired my brain in the sense of how I just approached everyone,
Mhm.
and being more honest, being more open, being more direct, um, both to people who I love and get along with really, really well, but also to people who I don't, and to people who are challenging to me and my personality, and so forth. Um, Fast forwarding a bit, to last year in the midst of the pandemic, I was furloughed from my job. And as an event producer, there's the added layer of having my industry decimated, along with, I'm sure, many others. Uh, and it didn't feel good,
Mm.
at all. And so in that sort of process of trying to think through what I wanted to do, I actually was, funny enough, interviewed by somebody around gratitude around my original project from 9 years ago. And I hung up the call, and I basically said to my partner, I said, what am I doing? I said, I know exactly what I need to do right now. it just kind of clicked. And so I decided to start basically a round 2 version of my project from 9 years ago. And I decided to call it Grateful with 2 L's, leaning into being full of gratitude. And so, yes, cheesy, but it worked. And I thought, sure. And I have learned through other projects to just not belabor the name too much and just to keep going. But the difference with this project, which I'm, can talk a bit more about as well, is that, this was started in the midst of a pandemic. And so every single person that I thanked was a phone call. There might have been 1 or 2 people that I was able to thank in person here in New York City safely. And so every single one was taken from my bedroom in my 1-bedroom apartment in New York City versus 9 years ago. My gratitude moments, if you will, happened in 3 different cities. I was traveling, I was, in person, I was in a coffee shops, I was on the phone. It was all over the place. So this one was unique in that sense. And it also was unique in the sense that everyone that I thanked for this project was somebody that I actually knew explicitly, because the first time I'd done this project, there were a handful of people like coffee shop baristas or airline flight attendants who I did thank, because they were just passerbyers in my day and in my life. And they played a very small role, but it was impactful. So this project was every day, talking to somebody and thinking through the specifics of our relationship. And then to sort of wrap up the synopsis is that I ended up stopping my gratitude, if you will, at number 265, because I decided that for the last 100 days of this entire 365-day project, that I was going to ask 100 people, some from this project, some from 9 years ago, to write a note of gratitude to somebody in their life. And you, Nikki, were one of those people. And I have to be honest, I mean, the idea to do that was sort of something it came up with on a whim and randomly in my head. And it has completely blown my mind with how people have written, what they've written about, who they've written about, and the time that they've put into it, as well as in most cases, not all, but in most cases, I was shocked by the immediacy of what they wanted to write about, of knowing, and all I did was ask the question. I just said, do you want to write a note about someone or something? And in most cases, again, not all, but in most, it took 5 seconds for people to say, oh, I know exactly what I want to say and who I want to say it to. And so, right off the bat, one of the biggest things I learned was, and I try not to look at it in a sad way and more of it in a hopeful way of just like, there's, is that people are potentially sitting on these thoughts, but why are we not sharing them? Or at least more explicitly, right? Like I might hang up the phone every day with my mom saying, I love you. But how often, right, are we explicitly saying, I love you for X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z made an impact in X, Y, and Z ways, like there's further layers you can get. So anyways, that's kind of the project. The crazy thing is that I'm 10 days away from finishing this project. I have 90 gratitude notes. I've posted 90 of them and I have 10 more left. So it's a pretty wild time right now.
Yeah. And I will tell you, being on both sides of it, right? So I got the call from you and I don't know, did I cry on the phone? I think I cried on the phone. Crying comes a lot. We talk about vulnerability. I grew up being kind of told not to cry, but crying is something that I welcome now. It's a wonderful stress reliever for any of you that have also grown up being told not to cry. It's on the list of the 7 things you should do to help complete your stress cycle. So watch some movies that make you tear up a little bit. Anyway, it was one of the most beautiful things. It was, you had told me like, this is what I'm doing. You kind of gave me a little bit of a heads up, but even with the caveat, I guess, experiencing you being like, hey, so I remember when we talked and like just it being the most normal human experience, but also it being such a beautiful reflection of the power of connection was like, especially in a time where we're so freaking disconnected. And I'm like, I am so sick of seeing myself and hearing myself. Like, can I, like, again, extrovert in me for sure. I was like, oh, there was a nostalgia to like being in that wonderful space with you. Like there was so much of what you brought to even just that phone call that like reframed my ability to, I don't know, just to see, I think, where I am in the moment. And then also what the power of what seems just like, because I went to a school that prioritized networking so very much. And so like meeting people and talking to people, like very organic for me. Oh, I mean, I started talking at like 6 months old. So like very organic for me to talk to people. But the depth of understanding the impact on the other end, and it not just being like, I got this job from you, or I, you know, not super transactional, but like, here's the impact of our paths crossing, was such a beautiful thing. Because it then again, like you're, well, and I guess again, like it evolved into, then allows you to start thinking that powerful connection happened here. And there are so many powerful connections in my life that I don't take a minute to think about. And so it's funny because I haven't really talked about this to anybody. I told my mom and one of my friends about my gratitude that I wrote, because I still, been working on it. And a big part of it was so interesting to me, and I'm curious to hear kind of how thematically this went for the 100 days, or at least the 90 days so far. It was something for me that was full of so much emotion. It was full of so much like grief and sadness and pain and vulnerability and urgency / procrastination. There was like so many emotions that came up in the process of thinking about gratitude. And I had two. When you would ask the question, I had two that came up. One was for a friend of mine that passed away a few years ago. And I actually have done I don't know if you've ever heard of Dear World. It was this thing that used to go around and you'd write a message that you wanted to tell somebody on your body. And so I had actually done like a very small version of a experiential, like, here's the message I want to say that I haven't been able to say out loud. And then the other was from a guy from college when on the day that my stepfather passed away. And it was like one of the most impactful days of my life. And that particular relationship was very fraught. And I never really, and still haven't, had the opportunity to express how I felt. And at the time, I know I didn't even know how I felt. There was too much going on. So the ability and the invitation to take a moment and reflect was like, I feel like my therapists of years prior were like, where was this project before? So it's so interesting because I think of gratitude as like a thank you and being grateful and feeling feeling full, but also the gift that you offered in the invitation actually had so much complexity and nuanced emotion that I wouldn't necessarily say was positive emotion, but is such human emotion and so important to move through our lives in a sense of, I guess, kind of honesty. And there's a little bit of accountability built into that too. So I'm curious, like, that was my experience and I was speaking for mine. I wonder how like the themes came through and what, like, you were mentioning like the speed with which people are like, yeah, I got one. How has gratitude, or at least your understanding of gratitude, shifted and changed both through your experience on the first one, 265, and the last 90 / will be 100?
Totally. First of all, thank you for sharing that about your note. And I thank you again for even just participating in this chapter of the project. It really has, when I said it blew my mind, it really continues to your point around what themes I've seen, because there's a lot of procrastination, a lot of hounding people to get this done in a way that I tried very carefully to say, like, you don't have to do this, but I would just appreciate it if you aren't going to do it, just tell me. Yeah. But a lot of people who clearly were torn. It was like, no, I want to, I just need more time. No, I want to, I just need more time. So a lot of procrastination, but for potentially various reasons that were very valid, right? Of, I'm personally slammed at work right now. Like, I don't know, if somebody had asked me to do this right now, I would probably procrastinate on it too. I had a handful of people decline for various reasons. And it took me a bit to like remove my ego from that and say, because my first thought, is like, come on, like you couldn't write a sentence, which I made clear that it could be one sentence. And then I would say, oh, who am I to, even remotely, I barged into their inbox, right, and said, will you do this? They have every right to say no. So that was a learning experience for me. But no, there was a lot of it's like there's so much to say. I mean, there were a handful of people who wrote around inanimate objects, let's say. There were a couple people who wrote around, or sorry, I should say like not tangible objects. There were a couple people who wrote about their bodies. There's one person in particular who took a while for me to get a response from, and ended up writing about his father who passed away from COVID earlier this year. And in his response to me, he shared that he would not, he basically said that he wasn't able to process, like literally and figuratively, the death of his father because of the pandemic. Like not everybody could be together, like he could, all that stuff. But he also mentioned that had it not been for me asking him to write a note, he said that he doesn't think he would have ever processed it, because by me asking, he was able to sit down and write, and by him writing, he was able to put out his thoughts and his gratitude towards his father. And that's just like one person. And then I had another person who, I hounded as well for a couple months. And this, off the bat, this person had said, I'm going to do it. And then after, again, hounding, she finally wrote it. And she sent me a text and said, hey, she said, I wrote my piece, but it's too personal and I don't want to share it. And then she said, which I think is very important, she said, I know you'll understand. And I just love the fact that she didn't say, I hope you'll understand, or is that okay? She didn't even ask for approval. She just said, I know you'll understand. As in this chapter is closed. I'm not sending it to you. Mm-hmm. That's it. And I just fucking loved it, because to me, again, the point isn't, no, I need this person to write this note to be on my project. Like, right. No, the actual point right at the end of the day is, offering people, or to potentially open up gratitude to other people in any way that means. And so she's like one of my favorite. I still have no idea who she wrote about, or what she wrote about, and if she's even shared that with that person or thing. And so I just think that is another great story. There's been a lot of people written about family, a lot of friends. My father is somebody who wrote a note, and I know that it is exceptionally hard for him to think and speak and write about gratitude. In every way, and yet he wrote one that was incredibly impactful to 4 important women in his life. He was raised predominantly, if not entirely, by women, and so it's just, again, I could speak for hours about this, because the notes have just been all across the board exceptional, in both their depth and their content. And also there's been a handful of folks who've asked to submit in like different mediums, like can I record something, can I draw something, and so there's some stuff on the horizon that I'm figuring out that I actually have not told you yet around what might come of this when the chapter closes, but yeah, we'll get there. Yeah, I'll stop there.
I'm so excited. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you that the impact, again, I say like paying it forward for these last 100 days, but even the impact that's happened in the conversations that I've had with people that aren't the person I wrote this about, the ability for us to talk about something that was hard for me to talk about creates room for them to show up and talk to me about things that have been hard. Like, again, the ripple that I can only imagine through your experience with TED, like that I will tell you, at least my experience of having TED Talks and people coming to me being like, oh my God, I'm like, oh, like I'm so happy. I said these things because I needed to say them and I thought they would be helpful, but for the impact and how they connected with you, that to me is like, it's the best gift of the experience, that you have no idea where your ripples go to and they just keep going. And you might never, ever have a sense of what it is, but the ability to show up with, again, so much honesty, vulnerability, and humanity. This is my very, I guess, slow and steady vibe, is like, that's the stuff I think changes the world. It's not it's not somebody shouting for 240 characters, 280 characters on Twitter.
Yep.
It's the ability to be willing to show up and actually be a person. That again is that little kid awe for the world, ability to show up and be like, hey, you want to be my friend? That we forget that we have the capacity to do with people we don't know. So I'm beyond grateful. I didn't even mean to say that. I am beyond grateful, 2 L's, for being invited to the experience. And I really encourage those of you that are listening to take a peek, or a peruse, you know what I mean, to peek, you're being welcome, at the Grateful Project for sure. Yeah, it's like, yeah, there's a part of me that's like, we don't even know what this, and I'm excited. So there's a nosy part of me that's like, what's happening next? So we'll just have to talk about that another time. But I'm just really, really excited for what's coming of this that is on the horizon, and also that you don't even know that's coming yet. Because, 8 years ago, I'm pretty positive. Well, I know that you didn't know there was a pandemic coming, I'm assuming, unless you're some sort of seer of sorts.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm excited for that. Okay, cool.
Well,
and my last, I have another question that I just want to bring up, because I remember when we talked the first time we talked, and you were telling me about your love of puns. And you wanted to, at the time you were talking about bringing puns to more living rooms / lives / everything through greeting cards, and making puns more kind of, I don't know, just the normal way we converse with each other. So tell me a little bit about your relationship with puns.
Oh man, yeah, well, I will. The one thing I did want to add is that I know you had said earlier around like what gratitude is, and something that I am very also passionate about is that, and this may, as a listener, this might not be what you want to hear, but like to me, gratitude is genuinely whatever the fuck you want it to be. And so, but I think it comes with this connotation of like, gratitude means you buy a journal and you write every morning, and it has to be about things, or it has to be about people, and it has to be daily, and it has to be, there's all these has to be's, and I think that could not be farther from the truth. And I've had friends since starting my project, I've had friends start their own and remark to me how really hard it is. And that's not to pat myself on the back, but actually to really acknowledge that like gratitude is tough, and it is, it's tough for a myriad of reasons. And I just, there's the reason why I mentioned earlier that when I was interviewed a year ago, and then I hung up that interview to think about this project. The guy who interviewed me, I'll just say his name is Austin Brower, and he wrote a book called Gratitude, a Work in Progress. And I'm featured in it, but that's, again, I mean, that sounds very sort of pluggy, but for me, the biggest thing about his book is that his book literally does what I'm trying to describe, which is like outline all of the options. Like he did the research of like, here's a million ways that you could practice gratitude, pick your own adventure. And I like love that perspective, as opposed to like, hey, here's how you're going to do gratitude.
Right.
Because
here are the 5 steps.
Right. Like that is, that is so not how my brain works, this prescriptive, whatever. And if it does, that's amazing, but not for me. And so I really just wanted to hammer that home around it genuinely is whatever you want it to be. But with puns, there's a lot to say about puns. I mean, I think the earliest, I will say this, and I think it's so funny. There's like a joke meme going around of gay boys and women having this attachment to their high school English teacher. Like this, oh, he was a pleasure to have in class, and it basically just means that you were like gay. It's very like tongue-in-cheek and not meant to be serious. It's just like, it happens to be something where a lot of gay men are like, oh my god, my English teacher in middle school or whatever changed my life. For me, it does kind of relate to puns, where my high school English teacher would often embark on pun wars with students, where like they would say something and he would just like slam his desk and be like, pun war, and then they'd go back and forth. And I was rarely partook in them, but I was just that epitome of a sponge, sort of. It was like seeing magic for the first time. Like my brain kind of exploded around, oh my god, the double meaning, that, oh my God, and then I starting to think of my own ideas. And so for me, it just totally relies on the sappy part of it is that it relies on the creativity of it, and it relies on quick thinking, and it's almost like doing a puzzle.
Yeah.
And then the fun part for me is just, I would imagine it would be like, I am in no way a musician, but I would imagine when a musician sits down and comes up with that riff or that chorus line that just clicks, like that's the way that my brain feels when I start thinking of puns. And it's like anyone, I think, doing their passion and finding their groove, or playing really well in a sport, or for like even just a few minutes. And so puns have always made me feel good, but they also make me laugh, which I think is hugely important.
Yes.
My main pun route is I like making punny drag names for drag queens. I am not a drag queen myself, but I have an obsession with, I have over like 150 names written in my phone of,
Yes.
play on word names, many of which will not be said on this call because of how inappropriate they are. But that is the best part, is I just think puns are just a really fun way to, like, again, like, loosen the mood, connect with people, make people laugh, and I love them so much.
I love that so much. And honestly, we've been started talking about the kind of, we didn't say this overtly, but through so much of what we're talking about is the power of language, right? And the power of what is spoken and what is unspoken, and what is identified and categorized as a meaning of a word. And the ability to have language morph and play and interplay. And when you were talking about musicians, I was actually thinking about, when you just said pun war, which I want to be in that English class, what the heck? I was thinking about like jazz musicians and kind of the improv,
Oh, exactly.
just like jam session of the ability to not only stand in your own creativity and just that generative brain processing, but also be able to spark ideas and passion and excitement in another person and interplay like that level of connection that feels, again, like it's a level of intimacy that is not normally what we talk about when we talk about language. Again, definitely not what we talk about the way we tend to talk to each other now. We don't necessarily allow ourselves to go to the level of depth and kind of playfulness. Again, play, at least to me, play can be such a vulnerable thing. And so I'm excited. Yes, heck yeah, for the incredible, I feel like however many people you've got in your phone, however many drag queen names you've got in your phone, to me, that's like, I work with somebody that talks a lot about kind of your spirit, like your spirit squad, your divine support squad. I feel like you've got like a drag queen name support squad behind you that, like, whether or not people see this, you're like, these are all people, I have a relationship with all these names. They've brought me joy. So hello, be part of my life right now. I think that that's absolutely wonderful. And I also grew up with a mother that loves words, wordplay, word games, Scrabble, word search. I loved Supermarket Sweep. And the part I loved the most was the word jumble part. Like, that was the game I wanted to be on, because I was like, wait, you can do food at the supermarket, which I'm like, yes, all day. And I can like be really good at word games and jumbles and like meanings of things. Yeah, let's go. So I'm sure your pun thing was not intended for me to go to Supermarket Sweep, but that's where my mind went. So yeah, I feel like what we need to do is when there are more things on the pun front, and when we get the reveal that like my nosy self is still like, Nikki, you want to know, but be patient, of what's coming for Grateful, we will definitely have to give an update and like share with the world.
Oh, for sure. I would love that. And I will also add that the wordplay thing has taken on a new, slowly, but a new thing where my partner is his first language was Spanish, and his family speaks Spanish, amongst English as well. But whenever I'm around them, I pick up on wordplay in what is not my predominant language, and it's like this amazing feeling of being like out of the joke, but not taking it personally. Like it's almost more curiosity based. It's like, oh my gosh, I need to understand this language so that I can understand why you all just laughed at that. Because to me it translates, because to me the translation is not funny. And then he'll be like, oh, well, it's a play on words. And I'm like, oh yeah, then I need to know.
Tell me.
And it's like, yeah, I guess there's like no, for me, like seeing people, like especially like comedians, for example, like on talk shows where they're actually friends, like having inside jokes, it's never really made me feel outside. It's almost more of like, oh, I love that they have that. Like it's
Yes.
how fun is it to see people connecting, even if it doesn't mean like that, like I am part of that, like that's okay
Right.
with me. I'm
Yeah.
sure there are moments where jealousy has come up, but for the most part, it's really just that idea of like, oh, how lovely is it to see that? And so that is like another reason why I think puns are so fun, because the joy that it brings. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Well, you bring joy in all the things you do. This is what I'm feeling right now. So, thank you.
Well, thank you.
And yeah, so if people want to follow you, find you, where should they be doing that?
That is a good question. If you want to follow me, find me. My website is briandoyle.co, C-O. I can't afford.com. And
Can anybody anymore, for real?
right.
Yeah.
Yes. Which is where you can find the Grateful Project. And I would say it's so funny how this has shifted over time. I think Instagram is a good space too, which is just my name as well, just Brian Doyle. But anywhere and everywhere, I am weird in the sense that I respond across the board.
Nice.
But website and Instagram, I think, are a good place to start.
Nice. All right. So listeners, Brian needs to be your new friend. Get on over to it and go to his events. Let me add that to the mix too, because we didn't even again, when there are real life in-person things happening, I just feel like it takes the magic that you're bringing in the virtual space to a whole nother level. So I'm excited for that future that hopefully will come sooner rather than later.
Truly.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for being on here. Oh, I feel I want to like hug you. I'm hugging my computer.
I know. Well, thank you for opening the space to myself and all of your other guests. You have a true gift at doing that.
The gift of gab. That's what I said before. Remember you were saying that an hour is going to be, we'll be done. We're over an hour. See, totally go forever. All right. Thank you.
Wasn't that a wonderful conversation? I could tell you, we could talk forever. It's funny, before we even got on there, Brian's like, we're not going to talk for that long. And of course we did. Of course we talked for forever. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope that you have already gone and followed Brian and you are ready to go take a closer look at the Grateful Project. I encourage you to think about who you might want to write a thank you note to, a note of gratitude to in your life, whether they get the note of gratitude or you write it for closure or just to get it out of your body and onto paper or onto the internet one way or another. I really encourage you to think about who, if I could write a note of gratitude to, would I write it to? What would I say? And allow for that processing to move through you. I want to take 1 minute and just say thank you to all of you that listen to these episodes. I want to say a special shout out to my cousin Chelsea. Hey girl, how you doing? She is living abroad and I know she listens to these episodes and I just want her to know how grateful I am for her ears and I'm sending her a massive hug right now. So for those of you that do listen to this podcast, let me know because I really, truly, I know if you've listened to this for a while, you've heard me say this, but truly I believe we are in conversation with each other and I want to hear your side of the conversation. So please do feel free to reach out. Let me know what you think about this podcast. What's resonated for you. If there's anything that you've done or conversations that you've had coming out of this is the stuff that like fills my cup. This is a passion project for sure for me. And I really do believe in the power of us sharing our stories. So I would love to hear from you how, if in any way this podcast has made you think a little differently, made you act a little differently, built relationships, had you take steps in your life that might not have happened otherwise. I definitely want to hear from you. Or if there are things that like really made you question things or that you don't agree with us, please, I want to hear about it because I really think it's important for us to continue conversation. As we mentioned in this episode with Brian, the ability for us to be live and connected with each other really is something that changes the world. So I really believe that you are a part of my conversation and I would love to have more of it with you. All right, my friends. So until next episode, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week ahead and I can't wait to catch you on the next one.